Hello! Who said you cannot do a serious talk show when you are in a ride by the river? So as you probably can tell from the title, I'm gonna talk about my experience in consulting, specifically at McKinsey BCG being one of them. Consulting is this very popular first job choice for a lot of people. I mean, who would really know what they're supposed to be doing by the age of 22? And consulting with this various opportunities to explore, as well as a very glamorous lifestyle, travel perks, and pretty name that you can put on your resume, becomes such a popular choice. However, after 2.5 years, I think it's at a point where I feel like the job itself just no longer aligns with my goals. So this is a quick reflection of my 2.5 years there. Hopefully it is informative to whatever career choice you're thinking about. There is such a tendency of consultants to always start with the bad things, but I'm gonna honor a learning that I had from one of the trainings, which is to always start with the good things. So let us start with the learnings first. The key learnings that I gained through consulting really is circled around 3 items: problem solving, networking, and taking ownership. Problem solving is that one must-have skill when you are recruiting for consulting. And I do think this is something that you really get to internalize throughout being a consultant. However, it is quite difficult for me to explain how this process is done and what are the exact thinking process that I have, but I do have noticed a few behaviors that I have developed over the time. And 3 behaviors, because consultants always need 3 points. Let's start with the first point, also the first step of problem solving, which is defining your problem well, or in other words, knowing what you're solving. There was a quite popular movie where there is an interesting quote that one of my colleagues love to quote all the time. It says, the key to a problem is finding the key problem. In Chinese, the original word is 解决问题的关键是找到关键的问题. It sounds meaningless, but then it really captures the essence, which is you need to define your goal that helps you save energy getting into something that is completely irrelevant to the problem that you're solving. So in short, know what you're solving. The second step is about framework. Framework is the one thing that you get tested quite a lot throughout the case interview process, and it's something that is the most important. Framework used to be a word that is a little bit hard for me to understand. But if I were to put it into a different form, framework really is just building up game plan. So you know what are the key pillars and what are the most effective supporting evidences that you would need. It also helps you have a whole picture of effort needed for solving this issue, so you can prioritize accordingly. And last but not least, effective decision making. I'll have to bring up that 80-20 rule that is basically in every consultant's mind. The 80-20 rule really is a good tool to apply when you are trying to make decisions, so that you focus on the needle moving pieces instead of the smaller branches that might be nice to have evidence or information to support. The next part, I feel like this would be a part that I really wish me in college would know, which is about networking. As I start to get used to it after 2 years of hardcore networking training, I think now is a good time to share all these things. It used to be the case that I feel like I need to prepare very clever questions to show that I'm smart. However, I feel like we are overcomplicating. Networking really is just two people connected, but it's in a work context. So I'll start by using a metaphor here that networking is like seed planting. When you start building a connection, have a brief introduction of each other's backgrounds, it really is at seed planting stage. As time goes on, you need to constantly catch up with people. It can be a very simple message as, hi, I just rolled off from a project and I've learned this and that. Or it can be an informal catch up, just talk about what's going on. It doesn't have to go very often, but you need to do it consistently. And then ultimately at some point, it's going to grow into a tree and it's time for you to harvest. For me personally, I've consistently followed up with an engagement manager who is working on a project that I'm really, really interested in. I think it took me a year to really be able to get on that project. So networking in short really is about planting the seed and then letting go of control. If you plant a seed, sometimes the seed grows, sometimes it doesn't. If this relationship is meant to become something, then when the time comes, it will. But if you're being really anxious, then it defeats the purpose of networking, which is really just knowing a different person. And then last but not least, let's talk about ownership. I know ownership can sound a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not planning to touch upon this part of ownership when some people might find that, oh, I'm being asked to do things that is more than what I'm being paid for, but rather an ownership, or I should say proactiveness in your own career development journey. There was actually a quite mind-blowing conversation I had during my first year at the firm. One of the senior leadership told me, like, you need to be very direct about what your goals are, what are your developmental needs, what are the opportunities that you want. Because if you don't talk, no one's gonna know what is there for you. And even if this is something not currently available, if you start talking about it and bringing it up, it sticks in people's minds. And then at some point, they could point you to the right people who can provide it, or they can provide it to you right away. It was mind-blowing to me because I was brought up in the Chinese culture, which is an Asian culture and also a very high context language culture. I've always learned to be less direct about what I'm thinking and what I want. Even if I know I want this, I'm not that comfortable saying it out loud. But this conversation, I think it makes a lot of sense because it's really hard for the other person to guess what you want. And if people don't know what you want, they're just going to assign you things the most appropriate for their own purpose. Disclaimer, I'm not saying you should be demanding when you're talking about it, but rather frame it in, this is what I'm looking for to develop myself further. I think all leaders would be able to understand, and if not, they might not be the right people that you're working with. These are all the great things that consulting equipped me for my next step in the career journey. But when it comes to why I'm leaving, let's move to a different place. See you later. Okay, so let's continue with the reason I'm quitting. The two reasons are actually highly associated with the uniqueness of consulting, and one of them even being the reason why I thought about joining consulting. I failed to make a 3, so I guess I failed the consultant's mission a little bit, but let's dive right in. So the first one actually is you don't get that much opportunity to explore. Consulting is known for the variety of industry, topics, and people that you can work with. All these different exposure helps you understand yourself better. However, the truth is a lot of the times you don't get to be on projects that you're really interested in, or you don't get that breadth of industry or topic focus. The two B's are actually quite local focused, meaning that you are staffed on projects of your own office. However, due to the geographical location, maybe most of the projects in your office would be centered around a few industries or a few topics. Kinsey, on the other hand, there is that global connection and global reach, but this trend is really decreasing post-COVID. You just don't get to experience as much because there aren't that variety of projects available anymore. On the other hand, with this very gloomy economic, the business are actually not as good as it used to be. When you have more people than projects, the idea of utilization just comes into play. There are times when people will have to get on a project even if it is not their top choice. On other times, when you really work well with a group of people, you just tend to be staffed by these leadership on and on again. I think this very much is just an issue of current circumstances, and that unfortunately I'm not at consulting at its best. The other thing is about lifestyle. I don't know how many people are aware of it, but the true consulting hours are intense, stressful, and grueling. It is hard for you to imagine it without experiencing it. Working is quite different from being in college, where you have the ability to arrange your time and effort. Working means that you are just constantly using your brain the whole time from 9 a.m. to at least 10 p.m. People talk a lot about the traveling perks, but the truth is you don't stay in the hotel that much because you are working such a long hour. The fact that you are working so hard every single day for over 12 hours, if not more, and then also having to sacrifice part of your weekend because of the traveling is just so exhausting. All that stress didn't really kick in during my first year, but starting my second year, I've been seeing yellow signs on my health check reports. I also felt that anxiety on Sunday night. When I'm getting to a point in life where I want to prioritize my physical and mental health, consulting lifestyle is just no longer for me. So looking back, I definitely do not regret joining at all. I think this is such a valuable experience that you can't get other places. But of course, these are personal experiences that has randomness as well as is limited by its geographical conditions. But overall, I'm hoping that my 2 cents of being a consultant at one of the MBB firms would provide you a bit of a different perspective of what people usually talk about, and in some ways a realistic one, and that it helps you on your own career development journey or when you are deciding what job you're looking for, whether you are already working or you're still a student looking for your first job. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you have any questions or any comments about my experience at consulting. I'm happy to make different videos about it, but that's all for today, and I'm gonna continue my ride to enjoy the spring and the air. Bye!